Good evening and welcome. I think we're starting with a regular meeting, so we'll stand and do the pledge, please. Thank you. I think we're going right to roll call. Looking at the agenda.
Mayor Dickey.
Here.
Vice Mayor Friedel.
Present.
Councilmember McMahon. Here. Councilmember Charno.
Present.
Councilmember Magazine. Councilmember Spellich.
Present.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
Present. Thank you. We have one item on this regular special meeting, consent agenda item. Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So I will adjourn them. Do I have to take a motion to adjourn? No. Okay, we adjourn. And now we're going to open the budget workshop, call this meeting to order, and Grady?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. We're about to give you a presentation on the fiscal year 22-23 budget. Our finance director and his staff have worked very closely with all the department directors to put together the proposed budget that you'll see before you tonight. One of the most important activities that the council takes part in and actually participates in and gives direction to staff is on a spending plan. A spending plan basically is our annual budget process, and it highlights all of the major priorities of the council for the next 12 months, both from an operating budget standpoint and services and programs, but also our major capital projects. And these are, again, the highlights and priorities of the council. And this typically starts with our staff in November, December, and then the council receives some preliminary budget information at the retreat in February. And then we go through and further refine and develop the process. And then, as you know, mid-March, we actually had a capital improvement program budget meeting with the council, and the council was able to provide us additional details. So this is a process that we don't take lightly. It's very important. And we also had, as late as last week, I believe, we had citizen involvement, and we had an open house on the budget last week as well, so that we could take public input before we actually have a final budget for council consideration and adoption in May. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to David Pock, our finance director, who will go through and do the presentation.
Thank you.
Hello. All right. So, yeah, this is our first official look at the proposed budget for fiscal year 23. And to start off, we're going to look, you've already seen this information actually before. This is the fiscal year 22 year-end estimates. Just take a quick look at them again so that kind of get some reference point to where we're going to be starting the year. Restricted funds, as we said before, are basically externally restricted either by statute or by an outside external entity. The biggest one of these funds is the streets fund, looking at about 1.5 million to end the year, and then you can see the rest of those. We don't have any debt service, so those next three are basically just carried over balances that roll over from year to year. Then as far as committed funds, these are basically internally restricted funds, restrictions set by council. We have the stabilization fund or rainy day fund, and that's going to be around 3.9 million according to policy. Capital projects fund is looking at, it's going to be end up around 4.4, and then the remaining funds there. Then as far as assigned funds, these are basically restricted by town policy. You got the environmental fund with 430,000. The facilities reserve fund looks enormous, but we have That's where we have the 4.2 million in general fund savings from this current year. We do get a little bit better interest rate since those funds are managed by PFM, our investment managers. I looked at that and we got, last month, I think we were at 0.67% interest on it. But when you compare that to our LGIP that gets 0.01, it makes a difference, so. And then our replacement funds. And then finally, our unassigned balance in the general fund. And you can see that at 9.2. As far as all the summary, across all funds, 3.4 million. And then the stability matrix or metrics that we have, we're actually improving year over year from 6.2 months of average revenue in unassigned compared to 6.4 is where we're expecting this year to end up. And that's taking out the CARES Act fund and Arpa money and that sort of thing. So, all right. Any questions so far on where we're going this year? All right. So real quick, I mentioned Arpa funds. Wanted to take a look since we did receive that first installment of $4.2 million in July. And then we'll take a look at some year-end transfers that are being suggested. So 4.2 received in July. 3.4 million is going to rural metro for the fire and emergency medical. 800,000 for MCSO. So that resulted in general fund savings of that same amount, 4.2. And as far as suggestions going forward, it's my suggestion that we leave that 4.2 in facilities fund under management by PFM to continue getting that higher interest rate. Since we will be receiving another 4.2 in July of this year, then we can use that money to pay for our public safety contracts. The general fund savings for next year, we can actually use and transfer to the streets fund and use that for pavement maintenance. And we can do that for 2 years, so we can do it for fiscal year 23 and 24. And then for 25, we can pull the money out of the facilities reserve and do that for another 2 years.
Dave,
Yes.
just this aspect of it, FY '25, this is just a general discussion.
Right.
Yeah, because there's, facilities, there's other things happening, the fountain and all that, so, but so there's nothing here binding?
Nothing
Okay.
binding at all. Yeah, the only thing that we would be looking for is direction on next year and how we want to handle the transfers. All right, so these are suggestions, obviously subject to change. We do need a transfer into the environmental fund to keep that fund operating. Suggested 500,000. That's what we typically have done in the past. Last year, we had also done these same types of transfers for facilities reserve. We did 500,000 for the operational expenses for that, and then put $1 million towards the lake liner. So that's recommended to do that again this year. And then the remainder, it basically falls into that category that gets transferred to the capital fund.
Yeah, I talked to David about this, I don't know, yesterday or the day before. I'm going to want to come back to the 500,000 for facilities reserve for annual funding, because I think we have an issue to discuss there.
And we will have an opportunity to talk about that. I believe our discussion that we had on the phone was the understanding that the study that was done in 2016 suggested about 960,000 a year, plus kind of an escalator each year for inflation. So this is below that amount.
Well, maybe this is the time to raise it. Yeah, it was 2016, and with inflation, that 960,000 we discussed would be well over $1 million a year. This year, we're contributing, as you showed, 500,000. For fiscal year 18 through 20, it was 500,000. Fiscal year 21, 0. Fiscal year 22, 1.5, with 1 million going to the liner.
Correct.
And so what I raised with you is, as we move forward, let's say several years, 27, you and I discussed, what do you think that would look like?
So according to the plan now, if we continue to put 500,000 in towards expenses in fiscal year 27, there would be a negative balance in the facilities reserve.
Be a negative balance.
Yes.
And I think that's something we really need to address. And it relates to some of the items in this year's budget that I'm having some real second thoughts about, but we don't have to get into right now.
Okay. And I will mention, sorry.
I think you were going to say what I was just going to say. Do you want to bring up the plan update that's underway right now?
So currently, we have contracted with Wildan to go through and the study and the program and basically all the line item expenses, the funding of it to see how much it would actually cost. There's been some, maybe some shortcomings in the current plan as far as the amount that was anticipated to do certain things, when they were going to be needed, that sort of thing. Everybody knows that inflation's out of whack right now. So we're basically looking at all those things right now. So we will have more information and bring that back to council.
And with this progression, in the out years, if we suddenly get hit with, other than the liner, get hit with things like a roof, a cooling system, a chiller, so on, we'd be out of money, correct?
In the fund, in that particular fund, yes, that's potential.
Well, in light of that, then are you still recommending the 500,000, or should we, cut into the lake liner by half? Or, or are we going to talk more about this tonight?
We will definitely have many more conversations as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year to see how things are shaping up. These can obviously change between now and the tentative budget and the final budget. The transfers is kind of an accounting deal. We don't actually budget for the transfers because that would be double counting some expenditures. So these can change without affecting the actual budget number. It's basically, though, something that we need to know going into the next fiscal year so we know basically what's going to get transferred to the capital fund. That's kind of the last step.
Yeah, and I want to point out a couple different things. So, David, how much did we put away last year for the lake liner?
$1 million.
Okay, and then how much did we put away last year for the facilities reserve?
500,000.
Okay.
We transferred a total of 1.5.
But the reason why I'm saying that, and then again this year, I am concerned about this, but I also want to point out that we actually contributed $1.5 million last year, and we're recommending for next year.
Right.
So in other words, these are items, the lake liner is actually in the facility reserve as an actual, line item. So we actually, we were exceeding the $1 million by $500,000. But I'm acknowledging, we actually had, when the primary property tax was proposed, $1 million of that each year was going to go into this fund. So we recognized that $500,000 was just not going to cut it, and there is a problem with that. So as the finance director indicated, when we get that report, there's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, and hopefully we'll be able to put our thinking caps on how we can get as close as we can to what the new report or the new study is indicating that we need to set aside each year. And I do remember when we had the study back in, I think it was 16, they had, I believe, 2 or 3 different scenarios. One was level funding, $960 some odd thousand a year. They also had it, you could start off lower, then go progressive, or you could actually start off higher and then progressively, go lower, kind of like what you can do with, debt financing and such. So anyways, just wanted to let you know. And then some of the things that are in there, you probably could finance if you had to. We've always talked about the lake liner as something that we could probably go and seek bond financing for the lake liner and all those other improvements. But again, this is the type of stuff that keeps a finance director and a town manager up at night, trying to balance all these different needs that our community has.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that you're on top of it, you always are, but the lake liner isn't the only thing. It's, there's a multitude of other possibilities that we'll have to finance. And we keep talking about the lake liner, but there is much more than that that can come up and will come up. And $1 million is fine, but what's $1 million 5 years from now with inflation? So all of those things, I think, have to, and I know you know this, all of those things have to be taken into consideration. I just think we have to be very cautious.
I have a couple of questions. So was this a council policy, or was this just something that we're doing, like, so for example, we have the 1% tax, sales tax that, or whatever the actual fraction is, that goes to downtown, or that goes to tourism and such. So these were committed or whatever, internally committed. Was this is not in that?
This schedule is not in total. The final point there, the reserve, the remaining revenues to capital projects is the only thing that's actually outlined in policy.
Okay. So do you recommend doing that? Having an actual policy that says such and such percentage of something will always go to facilities? Or is that overkill? Or does it help ensure that we put enough in there?
I think it's something to look at. I'm not really sure in the end what it would happen. As you can see, we've got very good policies relating to reserves. And we're setting aside a lot of money per policy into reserves. But what would start to happen is your operations would start to suffer. You would not have enough going into operations if we fully funded everything we needed to, because if you look at things like public safety grow typically at a faster clip than the rest of the budget. And so
Right.
I do think it's probably, we do need to have policies in place. But I'd like to see what our Wildan team is going to propose to us and recommend how other cities address these types of needs. We've only had this facilities replacement fund or facilities reserve since 2016. So it's a relatively new thing for the town to begin with.
That's true, and I'm sorry, it makes sense, sorry about that. It makes sense to do that, and I know that in the past, when we've tried to set a percentage or something, we've found, during a recession or something, we might have to change the balance from 35,
Right.
65 to whatever, 50-50. I wanted to bring this up, and since you did that, I'll do it with the environmental fund. So we don't have an environmental fee anymore, and since we are largely funding all of these stormwater and water management with just capital funds, or, hopefully maybe we can get some infrastructure funding for some of this stuff. But would it just be worth it to not even say we have an environmental fund? We're called a stormwater fund because we're not replenishing it with anything.
No. I hesitate a little bit because if I put on my auditor hat from the olden days, that it wouldn't be a fund because it doesn't have a dedicated revenue source for that purpose. When you look at the streets fund, it has a dedicated funding source. So as it stands now, and if there was no looking to doing an environmental fee down the road, it probably would be best to wind up that fund. But right now it does give us that option.
Which reminds me, have we ever heard back on being legally challenged by the state legislature or the AG's office on our ability to collect these funds, which we would have been collecting about $600,000 a year for the last, 4 or 5 years? That sure would have helped with Golden Eagle and all these other stormwater issues we have in washes.
Mayor, unless it came through in the last 15 minutes. No. No, we haven't.
Thank you.
There may be an opportunity after the election, depending on who's in that seat, if there's one that's friendlier towards cities, we may try to get the opinion. If there's one that's not, just to leave it the way it is, unfortunately. But
Ba-
Just a quick question. Is there any county money or state money that we could get for our environmental fund? I don't know if there's any money out there. I just thought I'd throw that out there. I know there's a lot of other things they look at, but
I'm just answering, there are grants and there are partnerships with the county and such, but as far as it existing as a fund, it was there because we were collecting the fee. So as long as it doesn't have to maintain an entity just in case we're able to collect it again, whoops, then I would say if we did, it wouldn't have to go into a particular fund. You know, we'd probably apply for something to say, oh, you know, could we fix the pipe around Panorama or whatever.
Mayor, that was a masterful response. Thank you. Because we are working with the Maricopa County Flood Control District right now on some potential either partnerships or grant assistance for some of our drainage, like our drainage master plan, right, David? But it wouldn't have to go into the environmental fund, so.
Based on this discussion, getting back to the reserve fund, I may have said this before, I really don't see putting $1 million into the liner. We're going to have to go to a bond. And personally, I would take half of that at least, or all of it, and put it in the reserve fund, and then decide whether or not we want to use it, for example, for streets or for something else. But I just don't understand the reasoning behind putting that much money aside for the liner when it's almost definite we're going to have to go for a bond.
Mayor, a couple years ago, we had Black and Veatch did an analysis of the lake, and they gave us good news. The good news was that we had a little bit more life left to the lake liner. And so we thought, let's use the time and let's try to build up a balance that we could maybe use as a down payment and then maybe finance the balance of it. So it was a good, I understand where Councilmember Magazine's coming from on that. But I think the council at the time thought that this is an opportunity. We have time a little bit on our side, so let's go ahead and set aside money. And then when we go before voters to ask if they might wish to consider approving a bond question, we can say, look, we've already set aside X number of dollars, and so we don't have to finance quite as much. So that was kind of the thinking of the council at that time.
I don't really want to get into a debate over this, but with the reserve fund basically going in a negative trajectory, I guess maybe that policy needs to be rethought. If we're talking about a negative by 2027, and that's not including any extra things or emergencies that come along, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to put $1 million into the liner right now when you could put that $1 million into the reserve fund. So that's just my position.
Well, just for clarification, and I appreciate what you're saying, Councilmember Magazine, it is still just going into the reserve fund. So the council ultimately will make the decision what to do with that money. And if the council's decision or if they have a different change in heart, they can certainly do that. But the good news is $1.5 million is going into that reserve fund.
All right. I guess I'm a little late with that slide, so we'll just keep going. All right, so looking ahead to fiscal year 23, just some ground rules as we get started. Wanted to I don't know if the council had a chance to look online at the online version of the budget book, but it is available online through the town's website. It's easy to navigate. You can get to things pretty easy. So we're excited about that. And we weren't quite as late getting the book out this year as we were last year, dealing with Microsoft Publisher. But anyways, a reminder that budget authority is not the same as fund balance. Budget authority is the permission. Fund balance is the actual resources that we use to purchase goods and services. If revenues are less than expected next year, the expenditures also have to decrease so that we can maintain fund balance. The tentative budget will be considered May 3rd. And that budget sets the absolute maximum that we can budget for next year. So that's coming up in a few weeks. And then the final budget is adopted June 7th. We can reduce the amount that is adopted in the tentative, but we cannot increase it. As far as revenues for next year, the common refrain that we stay conservative when we're estimating revenues. Basically, they're forecasted using a trend method with a 98% confidence level. And we also don't include revenues on incomplete projects, like the Havenly across the street. We didn't include any TPT revenue from that project until they're completed. Also, the preliminary state shared revenues, those numbers have been delayed this year from the league. They're still waiting for the DOT numbers. I was told yesterday in an email that we should have them by the end of this week. We shall see. So far, the estimates that you'll see in here are basically just my own based on prior years. All right, as far as expenditures, the contingency that's included in the general government department within the general fund, for next year, it's 2.9 has been included there. That's basically necessary because we estimate revenues at a certain level. Our base budget and supplements, if they fall below that revenue estimate, we have to make up that difference to keep a balanced budget. So, like I said, 2.9 included for next year. You can see that the expenditures, excluding contingency for the current year, were 19.7. Next year's 20.3, $600,000 increase in next year's base budget. And also, the recommended budget supplements are included in the numbers that you'll see coming up. So across all the funds, you can see general fund makes up about 3/4 of the pie. And then the others there, streets, next largest one at 14%. And then, I guess, yeah, special revenue and capital projects are tied there.
Where do the roundabout and the shade structures show up?
Those would be in the capital fund. This is the actual revenue slide, so it's not going to be on this slide, but these are the revenues coming into the town, into each of those funds.
Right. Okay.
This slide, as far as expenditures, it would be in that capital projects portion. So just to point out, total revenues for next year, 31.7. You can see total expenditures for next year across all funds is 40.5 million. That difference is fund balance that would be used. Basically, streets and capital projects use fund balance to fund a lot of their operations. All right. So as far as general fund goes, we're going to start off looking at the supplements. These are the non-personnel ongoing supplements.
And just to put this in perspective, in the past, when you've had your notebooks, this was the green sheet. So,
I don't know if I need to read through each of these, or if everybody's had a chance to look at them. If there's any questions about these ones.
So just to point out, so the first one is the request or the cost or whatever. The second column, or the next last column, I mean, is what town managers. So that is the actual amount we're more looking at, right?
Right.
What you actually
It's
are
included in the
approving of.
budget.
And then I noticed, so I'd asked Grady about the Biz Hub thing before. It didn't have an offset, but now it does. So thanks for putting that in there, because we are anticipating, if we go through with that there would be some income coming in. So that's not just a total expense on that one. Does anybody, if you have had a chance to look through these, did you have any questions, Jerry?
I
Vice
do.
Mayor?
I do have a couple questions. Thank you, Mayor. The Biz Hub, I love the idea and the program, but my concern with that lease is that that building is 50 years old, and there are undoubtedly issues that I want to make sure that we're not on the hook for. There's plumbing, roof, air conditioning, major mechanical issues with that. Has that been taken into consideration? And we're leasing that, so are we responsible for any of those repairs?
First of all, it's not a done deal.
Oh, okay.
So anything we do, this is a placeholder. And you'll see we actually have our Economic Development Director will do a little bit more of a thorough presentation to you tonight. But just like our buildings, like our Kiwanis building that we lease, the former Fountain Hills Theater that we also used to lease out, town was pretty much responsible for the building and the mechanicals and all that. My understanding is we would have really good terms with the school district. They did a analysis that was completed last year that showed some over the life of the building, for it to continue, they're going to have to invest, a significant amount of money. And I don't think that they would be looking at us for that. But they probably are looking for us to kind of be a stopgap so that they're not going in and putting a lot of money into the building for us. And I'm also not wanting to invest really a lot of assets or money into an asset that's not owned by the town. So my understanding is we'll do some cosmetic things, but there's not a lot that we're going to be doing. And if we can't come to some terms with the school district on that, like maybe having a set amount that we won't expend a certain amount on maintenance, then this will be something I won't recommend to the council. Because I totally share your concerns.
Great, and my only other thought is, again, I love the program, so we've got to do something with that. And maybe there's some alternatives right down in town that might suit us if this doesn't work out.
I'm glad you're thinking that way. I'm hopeful, though, the school superintendent has indicated a desire to try to work with us. And so we think we'll have some offsets to some of our annual operating costs for that building. You'll see that a little bit later.
Good, thank you.
I actually have questions about the Four Peaks building. Do you want me to wait until?
Do you mind
Okay,
if?
absolutely.
Yeah, because we have like
No, I
a
don't mind at all.
presentation on that.
All right. And then this is a continuation from that next page. I know I will add, as far as these ones go, a lot of these are events that are currently paid for using grant funds. We thought it was a good idea to include them in the general budget in case those grants aren't received. It's not like we can really skip a year without somebody noticing unless there's a pandemic or something. So.
Yeah, so just
I didn't say that.
for clarification to what the finance director said, yes, there's grants, but also if you look down further to like these special events like Spooky Blast, Turkey Trot, Extravaganza, there are sponsorships that are also offsets.
All right, and then the non-personnel one-time supplements, so these would not be recurring year to year.
So this is basically not the way we've seen this before. So, the way the budget's being presented, and it's really clear, I think. I mean, this is new, right?
Well, this is what we used to have on a green sheet that was standalone. And what we used to do prior to me becoming manager was we would put together our budgets, and we would all be told we were over budget, and we had to reduce our budgets by 10%. And so we started, when I became manager, this was a process a lot of different cities do. They have a supplemental budget process where you request budget supplements. And basically, they're evaluated and ranked and prioritized. And then you try to look for any offsets. Offsets would be revenues or fees or grants or sponsorships. And so this is just another way of showing it in a different format than what you've seen before. I don't believe in the past it was shown this way. You're absolutely right, Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought I looked this over close enough, but I must not have because I just almost fell out of my chair. 65 grand to replace chairs? What chairs are we replacing?
This is at the community center, all those chairs that we have for events.
Are we going to lazy boy recliners for everybody?
Rachel, do you want to come up and talk a little bit about the chairs?
All right. So the chairs at the community center, we have about between 400 and 450 chairs over there that are ready to be replaced. So we, in the past, have replaced them sort of piece by piece, 100 at a time, 200 at a time. It doesn't always make sense economically to do that when you make that size of an order. This is all in for about 450 chairs, all of the storage racks and all of the things needed to maintain the chairs over there.
Does anybody else think that might be a little crazy, or is that just, I kind of feel a little, sturdy chairs, they better be made out of titanium.
They definitely stand the test of time, but consider how many times they are stacked and unstacked and moved and everything else over there. They take a beating over there.
What are we doing with the old ones? Are we going to sell the old ones or something to offset?
They get surplus.
Yeah, they would go to surplus auction.
Okay.
How old are the old chairs?
They range in time in terms of when they were ordered, because we ordered them, like I said, about 100 at a time. So they range from anywhere from about 8 to 12 years, give or take.
Excuse me, when you said that it goes to auction, the old ones, do we get offset money back from that, or we just let them go?
No, we do. Whatever they're auctioned for, whatever that buyer's price is, that comes back to the town. I believe it just goes into the general fund.
Do you have any idea what that, no, it's just auction?
I don't. It depends, I guess,
Okay.
if they do it by lot or by total.
Okay, thank you.
Justin's our master of those things.
Any other questions?
We're not there yet, but we will.
All right. Any other questions on this side?
Yes.
Okay.
I do. What are contracted inspections not reimbursed for $100,000?
So those are for our development services, building inspections or plan reviews. I think we have the contract not too long ago for Brown and Associates is one of the big contracts that we have to basically do inspections that town staff cannot get to in a timely manner. And they're not reimbursed by, through a project, through a development agreement or something like that.
And you'll see when we get to the next slide, I think is the next slide, the personnel request. Yes. So there was a request for a building inspector, and I had concerns that with interest rates going up and a slowdown in building activity that will probably start happening sometime later this year, I don't want to bring another staff person on with benefits. If we end up having to do layoffs or something like that, I don't want to get into a layoff situation. I'd rather cut and reduce a budget to pay for contracted out help.
So if you end up, for some reason, hiring somebody, will this be transferred to that fund?
So this is just contracted help,
Right.
basically. So it's using a firm to provide the staffing resource.
Right, and it basically just adds the budget line item there for them. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to use it all. So.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, was there any other questions on that last page? Okay. All right, so then as far as personnel, you can see there were a few positions being recommended. There's a senior services activities coordinator, a part-time, a full-time facilities maintenance technician, moving one of the building safety permit technicians from part-time to full-time, adding a part-time code enforcement officer, the IT support specialist from part-time to three-quarters time, and then the part-time court clerk. There actually would be adding two part-time positions. However, one of those positions is currently in a contract status that we've had for, I believe, 3 years.
3 fiscal years, right?
Mayor,
So that contract position would go away and they would be brought in as an employee.
how many personnel will this bring us to?
I think this adds.
This is 3.75, the net, but what is
So it'd
what is
be-
our afterwards?
66 is where we're at now, I believe. So it'd be right around 70 FTEs.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So the code enforcement officer, part-time on weekends, we already have a code enforcement officer that works weekends?
This is doubling up the efforts. In fact, we will be able to have this person work the week and the weekends, part-time. With the sign ordinance that has gone into effect, and we think with the election coming up, there's going to be a lot of sign activity going on. We heard this from the council at the time you were going through your sign ordinance consideration, so that you thought that there was going to be a net impact on code enforcement, so.
Well, just to justify that, I know I had asked a couple months ago about code enforcement doing a presentation to us on a monthly or whatever, you know.
And I directed
basis.
staff to be doing that.
So I kind of like to see that there's a need for spending $30,000 for a part-time, you know, that it's justified.
Okay, and then the other thing, just to let you know, we were able to work out arrangements so that there would not be a net need of a new vehicle or a vehicle. It can use the existing vehicles as well, so to keep costs down.
I didn't want to keep making phone calls about this, but I'm seeing a lot of violations on the weekends. I'm seeing cardboard boxes with signs on them in the right-of-way. This weekend in particular, I saw a lot of them, and I don't know what we can do about it, but it's a problem.
I know that the code enforcement, where's John? Vince, I know, was off this past weekend, correct? So the nice thing about this is we'll always make sure we have coverage, because right now we don't have every day of the weekend covered, correct, with the current employee?
That's correct. We have Mr. Hatcher, who works some combination of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He varies those a little bit, so people don't get used to him working all the time. But he is currently on a 2-week vacation, so the next couple of weeks.
But if you see any violations, please forward them on to me, and we'll get them on. He's very good about being proactive and getting to these when he sees them, but he wasn't here this weekend.
What if he sees cardboard boxes with arrows saying, you know, yard side this way and that way? What's he supposed to do?
So depending upon the situation, he will either move the sign if it's just slightly out of place. Sometimes, when a situation like that, he would most likely pick it up and either return it to the address if he can identify that, or sometimes he'll just leave it in the truck and bring it back to the.
Yeah, they have no idea what addresses they are. These are just cardboard boxes with arrows saying open house, or this is for sale, or,
Right.
you know.
So situations like that, he probably just picks it up and brings it back.
So then this will bring us up to 2.5 FTEs then for code enforcement?
That's correct.
Well, we had the survey, and two things that floated to the top or came to the top were roads, which we are now putting more than $2 million in addition. And then the other thing was code enforcement.
Enforcement of codes.
And it's not just signs, of course. So I think that this is well worth it to me.
Grady, I don't want to be bothering you every time I see one. Who should we call? Who should we contact? We don't want to be calling you every weekend.
I know, but if you send me an email, I mean, I get it from a few of you, and I'm okay with that. And then, because I need to be the one, it's inappropriate for council to have direct contact with a staff person giving them direction. So please do that to me, and I frequently contact John or the individual employee. So,
okay.
And that way it also helps with tracking purposes to make sure there's follow-up.
Two points. Are we at the point where our code enforcement people are proactively, when they're out on their routes, looking and finding other errors and things that are going on in town? Like if they see somebody with a dog off leash or something like that, are they enforcing that? Or are we at that point yet?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, yes, I do identify things themselves to follow up on. I don't know if they handle dogs off leash. If that would be one of the things they'd pick up on, because that would typically be animal control. Maybe they do, I don't know, I'd have to ask them that question specifically. But yes, they do. And to Councilmember Spellich, we are working on that monthly report. It's not something we've done before, so we're figuring out the best way to put that information together. We should be able to start having those to you next month, I would hope.
And then I have another,
Just, if I may, just to your point, Vice Mayor, when I have frequently reported these to Vince, he's very good and sends me a photo showing it. He already took care of it earlier, so there was a lapse between the time that either the council member had been notified by a resident or from the time the council member saw it, and he frequently, and I usually forward that right back to the council member showing that the violation, like the sign that was in the right-of-way or whatever, had been taken care of. So he does act proactively when he can.
so then I have another question here. So we're adding a building inspector?
No, that the other item that you saw, I was concerned about adding a building inspector.
Okay.
And so we were adding contract money to do the same services.
Okay, all right, so that's a wash
Right.
then. Okay, great, thank you.
So it's fair to say that our code enforcement is not just complaint-based anymore, because that was one of the things that we really tried to
Right.
get over. And of course, the off-leash thing, that's me. I'm out there doing that, right? It's, the mayor's fine. No, that is the animal control, right? Maricopa
Right, it
County.
is.
Thanks.
It is.
All right, so now we're going to go look at basically the operating or base budgets for every department within the general fund. As you can see, the first three sets of bars on this graph are actuals. The final two are the current year budgeted amounts and next year's budgeted amounts. You can see they're very similar. Like I said earlier, it's about $600,000 difference. And the reason why they're matched is because we do have to have a balanced general fund budget. So as far as revenues coming into the general fund, you can see those. Obviously, the majority is TPT and then our state shared revenues for a total of $23.3 million. It's an increase of 2.6% for this year over next year over this year. As far as the expenditures, you can see that same amount, 23.3 million, 2.6%. The difference being that contingency number that's in that first line, general government, is what makes this balance. Otherwise, we'd be about $3 million shorter, or 20.2 million.
So David, going back real quick on the licenses and permits, is that kind of building permits you're thinking? Is that the primary
Yeah.
reduction?
Same question was actually asked last week at the open house. And when we took and looked at it, it was basically construction activity.
I'll leave that up there for a second. So the leases and rents, is that rental tax?
No. So all of the TPT on like residential rental and that sort of thing would be in the first line, in that taxes line, collected through TPT. As far as leases and rents, it would be everything from Ramada rentals to our bays that we rent out to Rural Metro for the ambulance to our cell tower leases.
Okay, so rental taxes are included in the top right there.
Correct.
So just wanted to mention a couple of things going on, just kind of legislatively, where there's something that I think is still alive to prevent cities and towns from collecting rental sales tax. And then we also talked a little bit about it, about HERF money and some other things that are in the works of being threatened. So hopefully, these numbers obviously are your best estimate and bet, and but some of this could be affected by legislation.
Right. We are watching, I believe it's 1116, Senate Bill 1116 is a residential rental. Just as clarification on that, it is the residential rental, so we still would get commercial rental, TPT. And it would not include short-term rentals that's included in a different category, reporting category. So 30 days or longer would be affected, which works out to be about 500,000 for us.
Okay.
So per year.
So that wouldn't include, for example, AIRB?
No.
Do we have those numbers somewhere?
As far as what we receive
Yeah.
from that category, yes.
I,
We have to give it to, we can't say for a specific vendor how much we receive, but I could get that specific
well,
number
the only reason
for
I
the
ask is,
category.
the only reason I ask is that I, for one, would like to see if we're seeing any real growth in the number of properties that are ARB. In part because we've had some communities that have really had some serious problems, like Sedona.
Right.
And without going through a lot of machinations, if there's some way to keep an eye on that, to see what impact they're having, it might be worth keeping an eye on. Not that we can control it, but at least we know what's going on.
Right, and we do have a residential rental registry. It doesn't differentiate between long-term and short-term. Currently, I believe we're right around 700 people or households or addresses that have registered throughout the past 3 years. However, without the legislature taking some action on short-term rentals and what we're allowed to do and what we're allowed to ask people to do, we can't ask for them to update their registration. There's some problems right now. Hopefully they get fixed. I believe there's one bill still alive in the legislature this session that might help fix some of that, so.
I know you can't separate out ARB from other rentals. I was going to ask whether or not that 700 had gone up, but we're seeing, I guess that doesn't mean anything. We're seeing a lot of buildings going up that are rentals and so on, so I guess we can't differentiate between them.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on revenues? All right. All right, so then as far as by department, you can see town council next year was 78,779 total budgeted.
Hey, David?
yeah, sorry.
This is what I was asking about the difference
right.
in the employment taxes, because nothing has changed.
Right.
33.95. I mean, it's not an amount. It's not a big amount, but it's just kind of like, was it the same pretty much?
Yeah, so a lot of that back in fiscal year 20, when the administrative assistant was split between town council and the town manager's department, that came out. And so that's why the benefits disappeared, because nobody on council gets any benefits in their paycheck. The admin assistant did. And then the employment taxes stayed the same, because I'm not sure if that was because admin assistant, maybe the employment taxes weren't split. I'm not sure why that actual line item didn't change between the years.
And the meetings is probably because of COVID, right?
Right.
We didn't do any, we
Yeah.
didn't go to the league, and then we did, and now you're using that number to, yeah.
Absolutely.
Perfect,
And-
thanks.
And I believe there was some meetings and conferences this year that you've been that you've attended. However, these are the budgeted numbers for fiscal year 22. All right. Then one of the largest departments of the town is the administration department, includes, town manager, town clerk, finance, administrative services, public information. So there's quite a few that roll up into this specific department, with 2.74 next year. Any questions on this slide? All right. Then general government, you can see, this department pays a lot of the townwide expenses, so big ones like insurance and that sort of thing. And then as well as the contingency, that last line, you can see how it's changed from the year. And I will say that this current fiscal year, we took a lot of the budget that we used for public safety and put it in the special revenue fund. So there was more contingency in the general fund because of that. This year, I didn't think that was necessarily a good idea, and it wasn't really showing apples to apples. and didn't give you a real idea. That's why I'd put in the difference in the contingency earlier on that earlier slide. So general fund, point being, general fund this year for fiscal year 23 shows all of the cost as if they were being paid public safety costs from the general fund. Then municipal court, 422,000. Public Works Department, slight increase to 1.5 million. Development Services. Sure. Sure.
Go back to Public Works for a second. No, all right, never mind.
All right, Development Services, 1.4, slightly 1.4. And like I said earlier, all the supplements that we looked at earlier are included in these numbers, so you can see that increase in contractual services by the $100,000. So other contractual services actually went down. Right, and then community services. Yes.
We need to slash this budget.
Chairs would be in there. Good job. All right, and then the fire contract with Rural Metro. This is a contracted 3% increase each year.
It's 4%, you said?
3%.
3%.
Yeah.
So obviously this looks this way because of the ARPA money or whatever, right?
Right,
big
so compared to
jump.
last year, yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't budgeted there, so that's what I was saying. It doesn't look quite right.
And the other thing is, we have, we're doing the assessments now of public safety, but this is just status quo. So this is
Right.
as if we just keep going with what we're
Correct.
doing. Okay, thank you.
We're on public safety, so I will just ask if this is not the proper place for this, but we had an audit going on too. Have we had any resolution on that yet?
I'll let the finance director give an update on that.
So we actually have had 2 meetings with MCSO after we finished, after the auditors finished looking at it. We're reviewing their last comments on the findings, and we do need to set up another meeting with them to kind of see where we're going to go next. Once we do that, I believe we'll be coming to council in an E-session to talk about it. All right. Speaking of MCSO, and again, this looks a little skewed just because of the money that was budgeted in special revenue fund this year. I should have looked. We did get the final numbers. I think it was it a 5% increase? Over 9. Okay. All right, and that finishes the general fund. So as far as this presentation goes, I'm only including the major funds, so it's the general fund, the streets fund, and the capital projects fund. All the other funds are included in the proposed budget that you received. If you have any questions on those, just let me know, and I can get those answered for you. So as far as the streets fund, this one there isn't a requirement to have a balanced budget, so the bars are not the same length. You'll see that for fiscal year 23, the revenues are less than the expenditures. That's because, like I said earlier, we don't budget for the transfers. If it's council's direction to do the 2.1 million transfer into the streets fund, similar to what we did this year, then obviously those revenues are going to look higher when we do our actuals. So right now, 5.9 million in expenditures for next year, with 4.3 coming in from multiple sources. Not all of that is HER fund. Some of it's from TPT, the HER fund, VLT, and then there's one other, like miscellaneous fees and interest and that sort of thing. So as far as the actual revenues, wasn't really trying to do these from memory. I should have just switched the slide. So you can see the different sources there. And then the expenditures. So fairly consistent from this year to next year. Now capital, any questions on the streets fund before we go on? Okay. Capital projects. There have been a few little changes to this. One was there was an opportunity that came up with a grant for the Safe Routes to School for next year, basically for some safety studies. Our portion of that would be $7,000. The Fed share would be 117, almost 118,000. So that was included as a line item. Are there any questions about that? I'm not the one to ask, but I know the guy that is. His name's my name too, so, all right. So these are all of the public works requests. There was one other minor change in here, about a third of the way down, with the Phase 2 Panorama Drive. That increased 30,000 from the last estimate. It was originally shown to you at the CIP workshop at 995,000. Now 1,025,000. And then you'll see that last line, the Safe Routes to School, shows the total for that project. However, we would only be responsible for 7,100 for it.
Alan?
Yeah, I've given this quite a bit of thought. And given the reserve fund and everything, I know folks think we should spend the money in the roundabout now and that it could cost more in the future. As I think staff knows, I've favored this for quite a while, but I'm beginning to think that we should not be spending the money this year. It could be looked at again next year or the following year. Same with the where is it? I'm looking down. The overlook, the access and lake overlook. So we're talking, I'm losing track here, I don't know, $350,000 or something like that. Does that seem right, David?
Yes.
So just me personally, I'm having some trouble with this, even though I had favored it in the past.
I am stunned, but in the best way. I too am opposed to this, vehemently opposed to it, and I can't believe we found common ground.
It happened once last year.
Can I jump into that pool too? The water's warm, come on in. I just think that if we don't have the money to do that program, the roundabout, why do a study and a design and sit it on top of the refrigerator and let it collect dust? So, and then when we do have money to do it, it'll have to be redone or amended anyway. So again, I agree with you two guys.
Grady, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to,
I
I just wanted to chime in. I totally understand where the council members that are concerned about the cost on the design. The one thing that I just want to remind the council, obviously it's up to the council as a whole what you want to do, but we've been very fortunate with seeking and being successful in applying for grants. And with the infrastructure bill, these are gifts that you have out there that you will probably not be able to see again in our lifetimes. And if we have projects already shovel-ready, meaning they're already designed, then we might be giving up money that would be paying for the actual project itself. So I'm just going back when we had the stimulus money from the Great Recession. Those cities that were able to get to the front of the line were the ones that had the designs already. Those that didn't, they were not really considered because there was just too many projects for consideration, and they didn't meet the prioritization. So I hear what the council's saying, and if that's what the council wants to do, obviously the staff and I will abide by what you want to do. But I just want you to think about it from a perspective of these projects may or may not get done. So there's not a guarantee that we can get federal funding for these. But at the same time, these projects tend to go up in cost. And I'll give you an example. Several years ago, we had identified the Fire Station 2, and we said the same thing. The council at the time, we were in a great recession, so I understand the council's decision at that point. But by holding off, it caused us to have that project go up, not only in cost to the point where the development fees were not enough to pay for that project. We had to have general fund money that kicked in. So just these are considerations for you to make, and if you wanted to give us direction tonight, we'll take the direction to take this off. But I just want you to keep those kind of thoughts in mind when you ultimately make your decision.
Two things. One thing I should have brought up about 42 slides ago, but I sat on it because I'm not sure if it's going to come up again later. But the reserve money that was actually mentioned was really only for the lake liner. I believe there's also another $1 million put aside for unexpected air conditioning breaks, somebody vandalizes the bathroom, that kind of thing. And that was not included in that. That being said, directly regarding that overlook concrete area, whatever we're calling it, one of my big concerns about designing it is I feel like our disc golf club people and our parks and rec people 100% need to be looped in on any conversation that happens there. Our disc golf area is world-renowned. People from around the world come here to use it, and we have had tournaments here. So are we impacting the disc golf? We also plan events there and make money on events that are there. So I feel like unless we're ready to have that conversation with Parks and Rec, with Community Services, with the disc golf people, I don't even know if we're ready to have the conversation about the lake overlook or the concrete area, whatever we're calling it.
Thank you. Alan?
I have in the past more than once asked for a list of projects that we are not funding. Where is that list?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, that list lives in our planning, our horizon. There are projects that we discuss with the town manager that require long-term planning that are not selected each year based on prioritization. We can certainly provide to you on a spreadsheet, and we have done that in the past, proposed projects that go back several years that were not selected or deferred or deemed unnecessary.
I really have asked for this several times. I've yet to see it. Projects that may not have been deemed necessary before, may be coming up again, maybe something we should consider. I don't know how I, for one, can make a decision on something on $350,000, $400,000 when I don't know what else it could be used for that we may deem, at least on the part of the council or me, something that we want to give priority to.
Well, I just want to just remind the council, and I can appreciate what Councilmember Magazine has said, but the capital is really, the staff makes recommendations. We present those to the council. We start off with the council retreat. We have a capital meeting with the council, and you continue to provide direction to staff as to what you want to see. We had a discussion during the retreat, I think, with Councilmember Magazine, saying he had concerns about, in the future, like going ahead and approving, once the budget was adopted, he had concerns about some of these that might be in the plan. And we reminded the council member and the council that you always have, you reserve the right not to approve the contract or award a contract. And that's how we've dealt with that. And there have been occasions when the council opted not to go forward with something that was in the capital improvement budget. But I'm hearing something different from you tonight, which is you're saying you would like to see a list of projects that have not passed the cut list, and you'd like to see that in consideration of the ones that are being recommended.
Grady, with all due respect, I have gone over this and over this and over this. This is not the first time. I have cited over the last couple of years several times that I want to see the cut list that doesn't make it into the budget so that we can make an intelligent determination as to what's more important than something else. So for example, if we take $350,000 and we don't spend it on this, what are some other projects that didn't make the cut list that you've determined as staff are more important? I've asked for this. I've asked for it repeatedly.
Well,
and I've
you
never seen it.
definitely are getting it on the operating budget, and I don't remember seeing this or having heard this at ever for the capital. So if you go back, David, just go back to the town manager recommended listing, there's a number of items there that are not recommended, and you can see that. You can see a column showing not recommended. But on the capital, I've never remembered ever hearing that you wanted it handled that way.
Okay, maybe I wasn't specific enough.
I think we're kind of talking about how do these things get generated. So when, over the course of the year, there's either our directors hear things, or they get ideas, or we have ideas, and they come up with their recommendations. So it doesn't necessarily mean something got cut. I mean, everything that gets suggested all year long, it might be hard to kind of enumerate that, to say, well, somebody thought they would like,
So-
a senior playground, say. So somebody may have said they would like to have an area in the playground or at the park that's a senior. So you're saying that you would like to see every suggestion or every thought that came, so that at our level, we would be like, okay, I'd rather see that. I'd rather see a Spartan racetrack or something than, doing something at the skate park. So you'd rather see everything that I think to me, we're getting the recommendations from staff based on a lot of different input.
And if I may, Mayor, so what is in front of you is sort of what Alan's getting at, but it was handled, was it at the retreat, or was that at the capital meeting? So the capital meeting in March, what you see in front of you, has the column showing the left column showing cost and then the recommended amount. And there were some things that were recommended either to postpone or not to go forward with. And that was handled last month at the capital improvement budget meeting.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I pray that the wait time at the Mayo Emergency Room isn't long today, because I'm going there, because I'm agreeing with him again. He 100% has asked for this before. I remember it distinctly, because I kind of thought it was a good idea. I just want to briefly touch upon what the town manager had to say about possibly missing out on some funds coming in the infrastructure bill. Let's address the 800-pound gorilla in the room. The index just came out this morning. I think they said inflation was 8.5, 8.6%. Anybody that knows anything about business or anybody that's good with numbers knows that that number is closer to 14%. So that's a BS number. I believe that, and this is just from what I've seen, I believe that what we've experienced in 2008 and 2009 will pale in comparison to what we're about to experience in the very near future. I think you're going to see a collapse of the real estate market, devaluing of the dollar already. I could go on for hours about this. I just am a firm believer in, and it was pointed out recently this weekend at the Elks golf outing when people came up to me and asked me if I was crazy. The shade structure leading the parade in that crazy talk. But also, sorry, Rachel. But I think that we as a council have to be very cautious about the difference between wants and needs. What we want and what we need. And I would really, really suggest that we as a council think about the money that we're going to spend on this overlook and this roundabout and all of this stuff. I think that will there be a cost increase if a year or two from now we use a consulting firm? Again, yeah, of course there's going to be a cost increase. Would the cost increase be the same? I don't think it's a genuine argument when you're saying, well, there's going to be a cost increase. It's not like we've already have the plans and we're in the process of purchasing materials and, you know, you have a material list and it's X amount of dollars now, 2 years, of course, in 2 years that material list could go up. I don't think a consulting company is going to go up quite as much as the actual building materials and everything. So I don't mean to go on a tangent, but I just caution this council, that's a lot of money. That's money that could be spent on other things. And I just don't think, I haven't gotten one email from one resident that was for this study. And I just want to really be cautious about spending that amount of money on these two projects.
One thing I want to make sure for the thousands of people at home watching, I want to make sure that you understand that Councilman Spellich just used the word study. What we're talking about is spending money on a literal study and design of the roundabout for the intersection at Saguaro and the Avenue and the pedestrian access and lake overlook. It is not actually doing the work. The money that we're talking about is for a study. And I think that's the first time we used the word study today. So I just wanted to make sure that our thousands of fans actually knew that.
Yeah, no, I'm listening, and I hear you. But I'm kind of like, you know, this is a budget session, and we could be budgeting this money. But say the design contract for the roundabout or design contract for the overlook, they're big enough numbers that we're going to go out for bid or whatever, and they're going to come back to the council for contract that we have to approve. So, you know, that might happen in the next 12 months. It might not. But, you know, it's always something we can just turn down at that time or say, no, you know, things, you know, the economy tanked per expert David over there, who knows? But, you know, it's not something that we're signing a contract tonight to commit this money. I mean, we're budgeting it into a category, but we're not spending it. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And all I was trying to make a point, I wasn't talking about the cost escalation on the design. I was really talking about the cost escalation on the construction. And we've seen cost escalations on projects the town has done to our surprise and dismay. Again, if council doesn't want to do that, you know, we're not trying to twist your arms into approving these. So, and to Councilmember Charnel's point, you know, council always has the right to say no, or even if it is just budgeted. So it's entirely up to the council if you want it in or if you don't want it in. If it is in, then you don't have to go forward with it if you don't want to.
Because obviously some of these items, you know, the impoundment area, storm drains, I mean, those take higher priority, you know, and they're obviously bigger ticket items as well. You know, and even the wayfinding signs, when we had the previous talks, it's like, yeah, let's go ahead with those, but who knows if they're going to come in at 235, and they might come in at, 350, 450, and then we're like, well, we're going to have to wait. So, and we still, I don't know if we're going to cut the lake liner down from $1 million or whatever. So there's other savings that we could employ here if we need to.
Madam Mayor, if I may, in regards to the improvements at Avenue of the Fountains in Saguaro and the lake overlook, neither one of those are studies. Each of those are design numbers. We already know that we need intersection improvements to increase traffic flow and pedestrian safety. And we already know that the lake is not accessible from the Avenue of the Fountains to the amenities. So there won't be any study included in it, just design.
Thank you. Councilman?
Where's the, I hesitate to say it, the community center shade? Where is that?
That's next.
Is that next?
On its way, sir.
That's coming up next?
We're doing public works.
I'm very excited about it. I just want to deal, I'm very excited about it. I can't wait for it to come before us.
Councilmember, are you referring to
Wait,
Rachel's
wait.
umbrella?
Let's, but that's public work, we're still on public works here. And the roundabout is, well, just to get back to that like to have or need to have kind of a discussion, a lot of what we do are like to haves, because we're trying to have a community that people want to live at and have enjoyment. And I mean, Parks and Rec, no offense, but all of that is like to have. So we have the things that we do need to do, the retention, the water, those things. Budgeting, well, first of all, I think the roundabout is a safety issue, one way or the other, that intersection. And I also know that it's a economic development boon to look at this overlook and to look at the roundabout and look at the Avenue of the Fountains altogether. This originally was a discussion in 2013, something like that, maybe before. So we've had a lot of time.
We should have funded it then. It would have been cheaper.
Well, I tried. And again, it's in our general plan and it's in our downtown development plan. We have some downtown money, we have tourism money. We did have some environmental money, which in other words, we're saying that we budget for this. This is how we come up with our maximum budget amount that we will be approving. Doesn't mean we have to spend it. But I think in light of the billions of dollars coming into the state of Arizona with the infrastructure bill, we can very easily call that roundabout an infrastructure project very easily. And even the access down to the park could be looked at like that. So I think we have a lot of options here. I think that we sort of stymie ourselves by not at least going ahead with the design, so we have an ability to use some of these other funds and other things available. And again, it will come back just like everything else does with a request for proposals or such. And if it's just like, hey, no way, we'll know a lot more as the year progresses too, of what our financial health will be. But I really feel like this is an important step for us to go ahead and go with this design for both of these, especially the roundabout, but it makes sense to do them both at the same time because they're right there. So I would be in favor of keeping these in the budget and leaving them as an option as we go forward in 22, 23.
All right, as far as what Councilman Spelch had brought up as far as the economy, that it is, today was a big number for inflation, and I agree with him, I don't see it going down anytime soon. But I would like to point out, which you've already pointed out as far as the capital projects, this does just put it in the budget. It doesn't mean that the contracts get approved later on down the road, so that does give us kind of a check valve when it does before the project gets started. So that's as far as the capital projects go. I would also like to say that the contingency in the general fund side gives us that check valve on those expenditures as well. If we see revenues dive, at least we've got $2.9 million this coming fiscal year to kind of to identify it and say, yes, this is a problem, it's going to be a long-term problem. It gives us some time to make some adjustments in the overall general fund budget as well. All right. With that being said, okay. I want to take cover fast enough. Yeah, so as far as the parks request for next year, I will mention that there was an adjustment made on this as well. The Centennial Pavilion, I don't get to say it very often because I'm always saying umbrella, but it was at the CIP meeting at $375,000 and it was adjusted down, and I'll let Director Goodwin talk about that.
Mayor and Council, thank you. I would like to point out, and Mayor, you've already kind of commented on this tonight, that the way this is presented tonight looks different than the way we've talked about it in the, earlier, in that the way we've done the capital projects for the parks is by park. So you're seeing a total by park, not per project, the way we reviewed them previously. So if you have a question specifically about a project, and hey, I thought we were going to do the skate park. Well, it's in there. It's just under Desert Vista Park. Because that's where the skate park lives. So that is where each of these projects are. But to get right to the point, I know the Centennial Pavilion has been the topic of du jour. So yes, we after we met last time, it was brought up if we could reevaluate how to bring the cost down. Also look at if the revenue potential for it. So that's what we were able to do. The pavilion itself is really a facility. It would be in addition to something that we could host events under, programs, performances, gatherings, private rentals, whatever you want to have under there. And I also understand the conversation about not wants versus needs. I certainly do. And I do think that there are a number of things here that we've talked about that are needs. We need new lights. We need a new skate park. It's crumbling. It's at a point where it needs these things. But it's also prudent of us to take the feedback that we've gotten about our community and what our community wants to become and make strategic decisions about leading in that direction too. So it is a balance, and I certainly respect that, and I appreciate the conversation this evening. That being said, we do feel we can do the Centennial Pavilion at a reduced cost if we take out some of the exterior additions, some of the landscaping, some of the other things we were intending to do around the space, and do those on a more phased approach. We'd planned on replacing some of the benches and some of the pads and redoing the whole space as a entirety. We do believe if we can phase that over time, that we don't have to do all that all in one fell swoop, so we can get that cost down. An answer to Councilman Spellich's question about revenue. Having talked with staff and done a quick analysis, we do believe that this is something that can probably bring in roughly about $8,000 a year in revenue. That is a conservative estimate. Of course, we don't know until we try or until we do, but that's based on roughly 10 half-day reservations a year under the same pricing model that we use for the amphitheater. That being said, what can I answer for you?
I have a question. Yes, the cost is a concern. Does it make any sense to wait on this project until the Dark Skies people have done their bit around there?
That's a great question. Because we don't know their timeline, it's really hard to answer to say, we don't know when they're breaking ground or when their project will begin. Obviously, they have quite a bit of funding to acquire first. I did have the opportunity to meet with several members of their committee, not all of them, but we were able to visit that and see the space, and they were supportive of the structure, that it's not a hindrance to them. If anything, it would add, again, to the scape and the experience of folks coming to our campus here. Waiting on them would be an unknown because we don't know when they'll start that project.
The most recent survey we saw indicated that the #1 priority for the town was roads. Now, I know $275,000 wouldn't even do more than fill a few potholes. However, there comes a point where I think you have to draw a line in the sand. And I just think, the community center's been there for, what, 20-something years? And we have done just fine without this. And would it be nice? Sure, there are lots of things that are nice, and I think it would be very nice. But I just can't in good conscience go along with something like this, even though it's only 270, but it's 275,000 here, it's 300,000 there, it's 400,000 there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. And I think at some point you just have to draw a line in the sand, and I'm drawing the line in the sand on this one.
Fair enough. All right, thanks.
All right, I'm back. This next slide changed a little bit too from our last meeting on the capital improvement program. I did not have next year's estimated revenues. So now I'm just looking, that should actually say fiscal year 23 construction transaction privilege tax. I apologize for that. So I didn't have that in the last slide. So we will have more of a fund balance than just a breaking even between project costs and revenues. Any questions here? All right. Keep missing I can take those question slides out. Sorry. All right, so we've already talked a little bit about this in the discussion, but the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, just to give you a little bit of background on it, and then the types of projects that are going to be available. The background, it was signed into law November 15th, 1.2 trillion to be spent on various types of projects. I'm pretty sure that might be the only time trillion gets spoken in this microphone, but who knows? Inflation is kind of crazy. The program categories include transportation, environmental, energy, broadband, cybersecurity, and disaster response. As far as the potential grant opportunities for the town that I was able to see, transportation, the Safe Streets for All program basically focuses on cyclist and pedestrian safety, so there's definitely some opportunities there. Wastewater, as far as the water recycling, reuse, and storage, I think we've got some of that going on down the street. And then flood mitigation, which has also been a big topic for the town lately. There's even some cybersecurity grants that might be available and use as far as vulnerability assessments and continuity of operations. We actually just started working on our new COOP, our this is why they call it the COOP, continuity of operations plan. So as far as going forward, there's many federal departments and agencies involved in trying to get their piece of that $1.2 million. You can imagine that's taken a little time to coordinate. ARPA funding last year, they basically got the bill signed and threw the money out right before they even had the guidance in place. There was kind of an interim final rule, which didn't make any sense. Finally got the final rule a couple months ago. That caused a lot of problems. So I think because of that, they're taking their time with this funding, and so it might be a while before we actually see the guidance on this. We'll watch for announcements, obviously. The league's a great source of information for us. We did add additional contingency in the special revenue fund in case any of this becomes available in fiscal year 23. Contingency and special revenue, it matches revenue and expenditures on both sides, so it's basically a wash. And it doesn't count towards our expenditure limitation for the year. I hit a slide. All right, are there any questions on this? All right. Then the last section is Bids Hub, and I get to leave and turn it over to Amanda.
So Amanda wasn't here, but when this first came up, we were at the council retreat back in February, and I proposed to the council an idea, a recommendation that we consider leasing the Four Peaks Elementary School from the school district for the purpose of continuing with the Biz Hub. Biz Hub was originally created a couple years ago, and with the departure of East Valley Institute of Technology, it just it's been really languishing, and it really hasn't really reached its full potential. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who is going to go through some slides. I understand there's some questions the council has, and we'll be happy to entertain those questions when she's done with her presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as Mr. Miller mentioned, we brought this up as a proposal during the retreat. I'm saying I was not here, but was with you guys in spirit. And so wanted to give you guys a status update. You'll see throughout, we don't have all of the information. I'll say where, but we wanted to, again, give you an update. This is a placeholder in your budget, and we're hoping to get a little bit more information, questions council has, so we can come prepared and have all that information before that tentative budget adoption, which I think is scheduled maybe tentatively on May 3rd. So Grady already mentioned sort of a little bit of the history, but really the Biz Hub was designed as a business accelerator. We haven't quite achieved that. I mean, so what that is bringing in, you know, small startup businesses, having a shared use space. And again, when we're talking startup, they don't really have the capital to go in a space. They may have an idea, and so we're looking to see if we can achieve that. And so leasing for about 3 years and partnering with the Arizona Business Advisors to help us with the marketing and leasing of the facility. So that top picture are some employees actually currently at the Biz Hub. And so there's over 61,000 square feet for the 4 peaks. There's 9 current tenants. 2 of those were originally home-based, and we just heard that one is looking to potentially expand within the school, so that's great news. And the town currently has approximately 300 home-based businesses, so we're thinking that could be a target market for this. One of our businesses has done truly what an accelerator does. They kind of started up in there, and then they left and have a bigger footprint within the town of Fountain Hills. And so again, that's what we're wanting to see. And then currently to this day, we've got 3 potential leads, some in health and wellness, 1 in assembly. So there is a desire for this. So here I sort of mentioned, so there's going to be some one-time cost for landscaping and resurfacing the parking lot. There could be some other fees that we are still working on. So we're waiting on third parties. Wish I could control them, but we can't. And so again, it appears we could get all that information before the May 3rd and want to make that commitment to you because want to make sure you guys can make an educated decision and have all the facts.
And if I may, Amanda, I just want to jump in on the parking lot. So the parking lot's really in rough shape, but it's really, we don't have a parking lot next to the park where we just added the zip lines and all that. So we're able to cobble those together and with the economies of scale, get a pretty good cost per square foot on the parking lot improvement. So, so we're thinking ahead and trying to save money so that wouldn't be so costly. And I think right now, Justin, wasn't the estimate that came in, was it for $19,000? That would do the school district part of the parking, and we'll only do that if we have a lease. We're not going to put it in unless we have a lease, as well as the side where the alleyway and the parking lot is adjacent to the park. So.
And then so this next slide and final slide before we get to questions is again, just tentatively looking at expenses at a flat rate of $75,000. And then revenues, I will tell you, I was very, very, very conservative. And so for 23, we're looking at over 124,000. In 24, 181,000. And then in 25, 238,000. And so for 24, so 23 looking a little bit flat, kind of staying flat this year, next year. And 24, 25, assuming potentially 4 new tenants. And so it doesn't include a concept of a co-working space in the library where we could rent out, again, maybe capitalize on the home-based businesses, and also any type of shared costs, as we talked with our partners, the business advisors. Quite often, sometimes you see the tenants share in some of the cost of the utilities, but some of that was not assumed.
Yes, and I just want to point out a few things. So this is not to point out that we're making money on this. I think you're going to be, we'll probably be breaking even, or we'll probably be subsidizing probably about $50,000 when this is all said and done. But we needed a placeholder from a budget standpoint to appropriate and have money in the budget for next year if this ends up happening. As we mentioned earlier, there were questions about the condition of the building. We anticipate, again, probably at worst case scenario, would probably lose about $50,000 a year. And I would probably, we also looked at the current leases, and that's where we were able to get, like for next year, we know that you can pretty much count on $124,000 on that. And that would have to be, of course, worked out in the lease agreement that we would be the primary anchor tenant and that we would be receiving the rental revenue for that and probably have some other protections in there for the town. I'll turn it back over to Amanda. I think I saw some other questions here.
Yeah, I confess I know very little about this. The revenue comes from the tenants.
Correct.
And what do we charge per square foot? Any idea?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Magazine, right now it varies and has been between the school district and the Arizona Business Advisors and the tenant. But I'll tell you, it hasn't been consistent and it just varies.
Well, would it be the same for everybody?
It is not because of different square footage. Some of the tenants have combined spaces. So it's not, it's different.
And some of this information is proprietary for us to share because, you know, there's also private sector that we compete with on this.
Is it below market? Can you
For the most part, it is below market. That's why they're there.
And how many square feet is this?
For the building, it's over 61,000 square feet.
And how many square feet are being used now?
That I don't know off the top of my head, Justin. 35,000.
And something we didn't mention is, in addition to this, we've identified, like, they have what's called a cafetorium. It would be a combined cafeteria and auditorium. We believe that we would also like to use that space after hours and on weekends for community services use for programming and maybe a teen center and things like that. But we would try to do it in such a way that it doesn't interfere with the daytime business use, which is the primary intended use of this building.
And I assume there's some criteria you use in terms of who you're willing to lease to? Or would they be developed, some kind of?
And so that we're looking at, depending on what, council's direction is. We've started having conversations with the Arizona Business Advisors, but what we're talking about is a bit of a reset. So it's clear on what type of businesses we are targeting. So we had a meeting this week, again, looking at what is already existing and capitalizing on. So again, the health and wellness, we've got the watch that are assembling watches, and again, someone similar, a different industry of assembly. And so we've landed on that, but there's still work to be done on the targeted industries.
I noticed you led with health and wellness. Was that aimed at me?
It's just happening, council member.
Mayor, if I may too, it's a good question. And I've kind of turned my nose up at a couple tenants, and I can't really go into details, but they were ones that I did not think really fit with a business accelerator. And it's nothing against the school district or what they're currently doing. It's just that they were the type that would probably get in and probably would never grow and get beyond that. And it was probably, they were more youth-oriented and not actually, they were like proprietorships and not actually businesses. So that's why I was kind of concerned. And so we're trying to develop what that criteria would be so that we would ensure that the best use of the facility is intended here.
I'm sorry, I do have one other question. Since it's below market rates, is there some point at which you say to a company, time to move out and go somewhere else? You may not be able to answer that, but I mean, do they stay below market rates for as long as they want, no matter how successful they are? I guess this is part of the question.
So Mayor and Councilmember, one, we're going to need to adhere, and we're working with our legal department, so we're going to need to adhere to what current leases are in place, but that will be part of our strategy if we do get the go-ahead from council to have those very conversations. You're welcome.
I'm assuming our goal here is to have these people move into some of these vacancies in our downtown area.
Absolutely.
That's why we're doing this. And your leads are going to come from some of our home-based businesses? And you're going to, I'm assuming you're going to work with our chamber to get some leads too, maybe?
Actually, who's been the biggest lead prior to the town's involvement has been MCO Realty. So you're probably familiar with a realtor named Zentar. Mm-hmm. He's actually been very active with trying to flush out leads with the school district. So I think that's going to continue.
Mayor and Vice Mayor, that I'll say all of the above. And so one thing we need to work on is that marketing, having that consistent messaging, and all of our partners knowing that availability. For this to continue to be successful, we need to rely on our community partners. So yes.
I have a long list of things. My concern about community services getting involved in the building is, one aspect is you've got businesses in there and they're not limited to you have to be out by 5 o'clock, so the evening hours are kids screaming or whatever. You may be annoying to some business owners, so we need to keep that in mind. Are we taking into consideration that we're going to have to hire a whole new community services staff to man this place? We're going to have to worry about janitorial services. It's going to have to be daytime and nighttime because now we're operating on both ends of the spectrum. There's also safety concerns that, to my recollection, I've toured the building probably a half dozen times now. I don't remember that there's like drop-down gates like you guys have down here to keep the kids on what we'll call the kid side and from the business side. So I feel like that would be an issue. It's been a while since I've been there to get connected to the internet, but the internet really was bad last time I was there. I didn't see it in the fabulous picture that was shown a little bit earlier, but somebody told me that there are tarps on the roof. So I feel like I've heard plumbing problems and roof problems.
Well, if I could just address the roof issue. So that is correct. We have seen that physically. But there have not been any detected leaks when we had the most recent rains. The staff went out there to go check and see. We did get some estimates of what it would cost to seal up the top of the roof, just so that we would have an idea. And it was going to be, was it $200,000? So that wasn't a new roof. That was just to put a seal on it. As far as the plumbing, we have had it scoped. Has that been completed, Justin?
Thank you.
And that's the sewer plumbing.
Council member, there was a considerable amount of conversation, to catch everybody up, about the new addition on the western side not having met the codes. In fact, our due diligence under direction from the town manager demonstrated that the pipe that services that area is in fact of adequate size and it has adequate slope on it. What it was is that it's the peat traps in all of these sinks and lavatory area is drying out, and that allows sewer gases to come in to other areas of the building. So we are confident that the sewer is adequately sized and functioning in regards to that portion. And you should, and I'll also say this, we have had the fire marshal in there, and lots of other professionals as part of our due diligence to ensure that we're providing the best up-to-date information to the town manager, of course, to provide back to the mayor and council in their decision-making. So there is a relatively large list of items that we've addressed in regards to life safety and access, and we will certainly move forward on some of those if directed to do so.
I still have a couple of things on my list if
Yeah,
I can.
no, please do. I mean,
I know with, and I don't really know how to ask this, but with the school being in charge of the building, as the advisory commission, and that's the committee, that's the only reason why I know about this, new businesses coming in needed to be a teaching or a learning type thing to accommodate the fact that it was still a school. So that being said, I don't know if I'm concerned about that or just tossing that out, that that might still be a problem that we need to take into consideration if we're going to be renting this out. Also, stop me if what I'm about to say is too much, but I'm under the impression that there are 2 businesses moving in that would meet the learning, teaching requirement, but they're actually existing businesses in town. So I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just pointing out that it's not a business incubator as we had hoped for. So are we going to be a business incubator, or are we looking for just business? I just feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions that we need to resolve before I'm actually ready to even have a conversation about
I'll
it.
let Amanda address that, but I think I kind of touched upon my concerns with it before going in, but do you want to address what she just brought up?
So 2 would be new. 1, we toured, again, we can't give too much information, but could no longer afford their rent, and so was looking at the Biz Hub, but as of this time, it is not going to work for a variety of reasons.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not shooting the businesses that are trying to move. That's not what I was doing at all. I'm just trying to make sure that
No, and these are all-
everybody's singing from the same hymnal
These
up
are all
here.
very fair questions, and if we, as an example, if we have to maintain that building, it's a no-go. There's no way I would put my reputation or have the town be paying for considerable albatross to put around her neck here. So we're gonna do our due diligence before there's a recommendation for a lease here. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I just want to be real clear, what you have before you, we've just, because of the timing and such, we just have a placeholder in the budget, so there's nothing more than that. So we're not obligated to do like the parking lot improvements or anything like that until we actually get a lease agreement, which hopefully is between now and the time the tentative, well, not between now and the tentative budget is adopted, but between now and maybe the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, in general, I'm in favor of it, all the due diligence that we can, at least exploring the concept further. It's obviously unfortunate, the demographics of the town and the dwindling school enrollment, forced the closure of that campus, and so now it's kind of a community issue because, you hate to just have a building sitting there vacant or what have you. And so I think this is a good faith effort to try to kind of revive that building and keep it viable. But yeah, obviously if there's major issues, it's not something, we want to approach either. But I think for this fiscal year, we should proceed as you guys are talking about and see what happens. I mean, within the next 5 years, what have you, school district might be looking at, well, what are we going to do with McDowell as well? So, I mean, there's just all these community issues that we kind of need to tackle as a team and figure out, what the community wants to do and how we go about it, so.
All right, so I just wanted to point out to our thousands of fans that we were reminded of. like I had mentioned earlier, that the town, the proposed budget book is available on the town's website. If everybody goes to your government and then down in the right side, town budget, it takes you to this page. And the first link under the video is the proposed budget that we just went through today. And it says it's not been published. I think I need to flip a switch upstairs, but that's where it will be. And it will have all of the detail and everything, the graphs and the entire book. It can be printed, sections can be selected that you want to print if you don't want to do the whole thing. But that's where everybody would be able to find that.
And David has been very modest. This was a major implementation that both he and Beata on his staff really were able to do this fiscal year. And it's a workflow, web-based system. And so it actually, in the end, it was a lot of effort on their part to get this implemented. But in the end, it's going to make producing a budget book much more easier. The staff also really enjoyed using it, and I think this is just showing you the innovation that David and his staff had in putting together something that really streamlines our entire budget process. So kudos to you guys.
And then the last thing I would say is if anybody has any questions with the proposed budget before we go through and do the tentative in May, just let us know. I'd be happy to answer.
We need a question slide.
Oh, I think I closed it already. Sorry, I'll make another one.
Then we'll answer.
Right. I was just trying to get, like the 125 slides, that you're used to.
Thank you so much for the presentations and all the work that went into it, of course, from all our directors and staff and Grady, and Aaron and everybody. So any further questions for anybody? Take a motion to adjourn? Second. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.